Welcome back to another episode of the Mental Lotline. It's me, Akshita Tripathi, and today I'll be co-hosting with
Sydney Quatch. Hosted by the Laugh Out Together Foundation, the Mental Lotline is a monthly mental health based podcast series where we talk all about the powerful little being inside of you, your mind. For more information, feel free to check out Laugh Out Together Foundation on Instagram at lot_foundation.
for this episode, we will be tackling the topic of societal pressure and self-esteem. Since Sydney and I are both high schoolers, we both have firsthand experience about the pressure that is added on by people that are close to you, whether it's purposely or unintentionally. This constant pressure can really wear down on your self esteem over time and cause serious harm to your mental health.
As per tradition of the Mental Lotline, we have invited a guest to talk about this very important issue with us. Our guest is not only a trauma informed yoga instructor, but also a licensed clinical social worker who specializes in cognitive behavioral therapy, exposure, and response prevention. She is currently working as a friendly local therapist trying to help and improve the lives of her patients. Please welcome Mrs. Carla Sanchez.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, we thank you so much for being here. Why don't you tell us a bit more about yourself?
Sure. I know you guys are from OC, so I'm actually originally from the Orange County as well. I went to high school over there, so now I'm in Sacramento. But a little about me: I really enjoy yoga, nature, my pets that might make an appearance at some point. So if there's barking, my bad. But yeah. Out here in Sacramento.
That's really interesting. But I was wondering what made you interested in your current profession.
Yeah, as you know, my background is in clinical social work. So I kind of started getting into sociology and social work because it really emphasized more of that, the social inequality, and that kind of led me into the field of social work. And as you might know, social work is about helping people. So one of the ways that comes into play is through mental health. And so I kind of started inching in towards there. And then once I started doing internships in mental health, I really enjoyed it. And it kind of just took off from there. And here I am now. So it ended up being really perfect for, I guess, my personality too, so it kind of just fell into it, but it ended up being a really good decision for me overall.
I feel like that's wonderful that you found a way to stem from interests that you had and just really grow with it and become this wonderful person you are now. Um, so I'm sure that with your background and the jobs that you hold, you've met many patients and clients that experience societal pressure and its negative effects on their mental health. So how do you see self-esteem and societal pressure correlated in your patients and our society?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's a very direct correlation in the sense that the more societal pressure that we feel, the less good about ourselves that we feel, right? If the expectation is for us to be perfect, to be doing all these things and standing out in all these ways, then of course we're going to always kind of be coming up short, right? So when you have really high expectations, that can be a good thing, but not if you're constantly coming up short, right? So I think societal pressure can definitely make us feel like we should do certain things, we need to be doing more, that we're not good enough, essentially, just the way we are. So yeah, and I see that a lot with the people that I work with, and just people in general, that constant feeling of like, I'm not doing enough, I'm not enough, that striving for more.
I actually completely relate to that feeling of not being able to acknowledge that I'm doing actually quite a bit. And when I compare myself to others, I feel like I'm falling behind. Actually, recently I've been choosing my classes for next year, which is junior year. And of course, I've asked my other friends what classes they're choosing. And They all chose AP classes, and somehow I kind of feel like I've been lacking and that I will fall behind if I don't take whatever AP classes they're also taking.
Yeah. So it's the
And
should,
yeah,
right? I'm sorry. You said like you feel like you should be taking the AP classes.
Yeah.
and like throughout my friends and community, as I've also been choosing my classes, I see similar forms of societal pressure present, and like also sometimes in the form of self-deprivation, just because someone near you is better in a specific competitive atmosphere. But even though all this happens, which it inevitably will, what coping methods do you suppose to build up self-esteem?
Yeah, and I'm actually here to say that maybe we shouldn't build up our self-esteem. So hear me out on this. Because self-esteem, the problem with self-esteem is that it always is in relation to other people. I feel good about myself when I do good things that make me stand out in comparison to other people. So what the research shows about self-esteem is that oftentimes we will have to inflate our ego or put people down in order to make ourselves feel better, because self-esteem is essentially always comparison based. And as always, you might be better at something than somebody else, but you're always going to be not as good as somebody else. There's always going to be somebody that's better in some realm. So self-esteem kind of sets us up for feeling bad for ourselves and only is there if we're really doing well. So my suggestion in terms of coping is actually to build self-compassion instead of self-esteem. You following with me so far, or
No,
what
no,
how does
no.
that
I
sound?
definitely see what you mean there, and I feel like a lot of the times we'll try to inflate our ego because we're like, oh, we need to look better than them because everyone's competing here, and if I'm not on top, then I'm not good enough, and it's just another thing.
Exactly. And um, and unfortunately, like I said, it's only there if you're doing well. So what happens when you fail? What happens when you know, you yell at your parents and or you act in a way that you regret? Where's self-esteem there? It's usually not there, right? It's usually then when we kind of come into the other side of being really negative and self-critical. So self-compassion is about being able to acknowledge both the great qualities about myself and the fact that I'm human and there's things that aren't so great about me and I make mistakes and I fail. And that's part of the human experience.
Those things sound like well, it's really interesting because I never really thought of self-esteem that way. And I think I probably should change my perspective on how I view things. So that's good to know. But adding on to um, the overall idea of self-esteem, how it's probably based on the interactions with other people. Um, do you feel like that some people might have like people with high self-esteem are probably like more fearful to like continue with like their self-love and their compassion um because of people maybe deeming them as egotistical and it's just not
I feel like
socially accepted.
adding on to what Sydney's trying to say, I think what the main idea is that many times people with a higher ego struggle to get the self-compassion that you're talking about because they've already been put in this mindset that they have to be competitive and that there's no time for them to like find compassion, find peace with what they have. So what do you suggest for people in that sense?
Yeah, and I think I wonder if what you're saying is a little bit of like if when we aren't kind to ourselves, sometimes people feel that as like being self-indulgent or being like
Yeah.
you're so full of yourself, that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And I think and that's again part of the reason I think self-compassion is better than self-esteem because self-esteem you can have an incredibly high self-esteem and still be kind of a terrible person, right? Like you could still be like mean but really think that you are great. And so that is problematic, right? Whereas self-compassion is about being kind to yourself, not necessarily saying you're the best, you're amazing, you're this and this and that, but more like, hey, you're worthy just the way you are. And great that you have these good things that you're doing. But even if you weren't doing those things, you're still worthy just the way you are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's actually pretty valuable information for me at this point in time. But I was wondering about what the overall stigma is around the word of ego, because whenever someone says it, it's always in a negative context.
Yeah, like egotistical, right?
Right.
Somebody who's full of themselves. Yeah,
Right.
and I think like if you take a word, when people are like, I shouldn't have an ego, it's like, well, we all have an ego, unless you're like maybe like a monk who's like been doing, meditation for like years and you somehow figured it out. I don't really know anybody in that realm. As far as I know, we all have an ego. We all have a sense of self, right? And that's
Mhm.
not problematic by itself, but it becomes problematic when we have to kind of put other people down in order to make ourselves feel good, right? So I don't have a problem with you feeling like you're great, but if you have to put people down in order to do that, or you know you have to inflate yourself and make yourself feel like you're better in order to get that self-esteem, then that's problematic. But having an ego in by itself, it's not. But yeah, I think I definitely agree with what you're saying, that there's a little bit of that stigma there.
Yeah, I mean, I personally, I feel like even when I talk many of the times, because I've been influenced so much by society, whenever I'm trying to say, oh, like you're so full of yourself, you have an ego. And what I don't realize many of the time is that everyone has an ego. Everyone has, like, as you were saying, a sense of their self. Um, and as we know that you are like in a much different stage of life as us, as you have had many more experiences in your past, and everyone has a different background, everyone has different like life, um, just everyone has a different life. So I don't know, based on like your life, how do you see self-esteem and societal pressure affect you and your life, and how do you cope with it?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, one thing that I think is important to know is that societal pressure really does not, it hasn't gone away from when I was your age to now. It's just maybe changed in the way it looks. So it's going to be there. It's going to be there. I don't know, for as long as I can. I don't know, maybe into old age, but it's going to be there. It just looks different. So I experience it to this day, and not always am I super into it, but where I can kind of challenge it. Sometimes I fall into that, and that's, I also think it's like a part of it that our society is kind of priming us to in a way feel that pressure, because people make money off of us feeling like we're inadequate, right? So I think the big part of what I do to kind of cope with it is really mainly that awareness of what's happening, of like, oh, I'm starting to feel like insecure, I'm starting to feel this. And I really have been kind of that cultivating the mindfulness and the self-compassion practices have really been a game changer, I think, with that. Um, so yeah, does that answer your question?
Yes, that definitely does because I personally I've had a competitive mindset since I was like young,
Mhm.
and ever since then I've just, especially going to a school when everyone is so amazing, like everyone does so many things, and then many times, as much as you love the people around you, as much as you know them, sometimes cultivating a mindset that will support them unconditionally instead of when you are feeling okay is definitely something that I have to work on.
Mhm.
And I mean, I'll get there, but
Mhm.
it's gonna take a bit. And so I just definitely want to say that personally for me, during the time of quarantine, I felt super isolated, and thinking about myself more definitely impacted my self-esteem. And I feel like, Sydney, did you feel the same? Because we
Oh,
both kind of,
100%. 100%.
and I
Yeah.
feel like when, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So during quarantine, a lot of people have been doing a lot of things and a lot of extracurricular activities, picking up new hobbies and learning new skills. While I'm over here just sitting in my bed, and I don't know, just comparing, well, I think inevitable for me to start comparing myself to other people, but it really takes a toll, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. And through the time of like quarantine and all, how did you notice a trend in like people's self-esteem due to our events in our society?
Yeah, I mean, because I think what you're saying is very important. You're saying like you were more isolated, right? So when we're more isolated, we kind of turn inward just naturally, and we're on our phones a lot more, right? So, and with our phones and social media, the research is very clear on that. The more social media usage that you have, it is associated with more depression and anxiety. So there's a little bit of that of just like spending more time alone in our phones, which, you know, I think is part of it is related to that. And I think, you know, with Sydney, what you mentioned about seeing people and doing all these things and they seem to be so productive. And it's like, I think that's the problem, right? We see these like these images of people, especially on social media, of like what their lives must look like, but they're not showing us when they're just hanging out Netflixing or when they're bored. They're just showing us these highlights of all these really cool things that they're doing, and we take that and we're like, I should be doing that, right? What's wrong with me that I'm not doing that? And so it's again starting to compare, and that's a normal part of human nature to be comparing. But I'm curious with you guys. Do you feel when the pandemic happened, did you find that you were spending a lot more time on social media, and do you think that kind of could be related to some of that self-esteem?
Yeah,
Oh,
I don't
yeah.
know about Akshita, but I 100% started spending more time on social media.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, I didn't have social media before quarantine, and I got it over quarantine.
Mhm.
And so I can't really say that it's my usage increased during quarantine because I didn't have it before, but
Right.
I definitely have to say that you become a lot more active on it and you look around. Like I even do it to now, even though we do go to school and we do still see people, I still go and I scroll through and sometimes I'm like, oh, well, they're doing that and I'm sitting over here I watching Netflix and eating a tub of ice cream. I mean, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you make judgment, right? What they're doing is probably better than what I'm doing, and that's where it becomes a problem, right? Like then we start to feel down on ourselves.
And I feel like through this, you mentioned changing, you brought us a completely different mindset that I wouldn't have actually ever thought of, but changing self-esteem to self-compassion. But you mentioned like there's different ways to do it and how you do it too. But how specifically, that would you use it, and when would you use it? Because I'm a kind of person that I need it there, like written for me, and I need it like there. It's harder, even though I can be creative or things, but it's harder for me to imagine. So it'd be really nice if you could like let us know.
Yeah, definitely. And there's different ways that you can do it, but like very basic self-compassion practices. I like to think of like three different aspects of it. Like the first is that mindfulness piece, the being aware that you are suffering in some sense. And people have a hard time even doing that. Like, I'm feeling sad right now, or I'm feeling lonely, or I'm feeling insecure. Like that is the first step. I identify what's happening. And the second part is to acknowledge that whatever you're feeling, it's totally normal and part of the human experience, that you're not alone. And the reason for that that's so important is because a lot of times when we're going through things, we feel like we're all alone and nobody understands us and everybody else seems like they're so happy and doing great. And what's wrong with me? And so that second piece is really important, that this is normal. This is part of being human. I'm allowed to make mistakes. I'm allowed to feel bad. That is part of the human experience, right? And then like that third piece is also to kind of identify, to be able to see those thoughts outside of yourself in a way. Again, back to that mindfulness piece of being able to understand what's happening without overinflating these things or minimizing it. So sometimes we minimize by saying, oh, that's not a big deal. That doesn't really affect me. Or sometimes we overinflate it and we like dramatize it, right? And it's about seeing those things in a non-judgmental way as much as possible.
I see.
But
Go
ahead.
Yeah, no, you can go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, okay. So with this mindfulness and the three aspects, like how would you, okay, I understand the overall concept, but how do you actually like apply it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, there's a couple different ways that I like, but one with the easiest ways that that I would suggest is if you're going through something, if you're feeling down on yourself, to think about what if your best friend, someone that you love and that you would never talk to in the way that you talk to yourself, because we all are our own worst critics, and so how would you talk to your friend coming with that problem? Would you be telling them like, how could you, messed up, you're a terrible person? Or would you be like, hey, it's okay to feel the way you do, or you'd be supportive. And so sometimes it can be really hard to talk that way to yourself, but if you can take it outside of like, okay, if my friend was coming to me with this, what would I tell them? That could be one way to start cultivating that self-compassion.
I think this like kind of, I don't know why, but I just made this connection all of a sudden because I've been thinking about English a lot because finals are coming up. But in English, whenever we write an essay, we're told to give ourselves constructive feedback in variation to strict criticism. And whenever someone else is supposed to look at our essay, they're also supposed to give constructive feedback. And if you look at it, we've been taught from a young age to not criticize ourselves and to know that it's okay. Don't be judgmental of yourself because you are yourself. You made that decision a while ago, but it felt right at the time, or you need to find peace with what you did before. So I think that change from severe criticism to constructive feedback is something we all struggle with. And I think that's what you're trying to like propose that people start doing instead of like the community trying to spread awareness and break the stigma on self-esteem, which is important too, but it's more self-compassion. And I don't know if this comparison was kind of what you're going for, but
no, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I think that is absolutely right, that we are primed to kind of not try to be self-critical, to not really acknowledge what we do wrong, unfortunately, because it's uncomfortable. So one of the self-compassion practices too that kind of correlates with what you're saying is writing down like a list, like 5 items of things qualities that are great about you, then 5 things that are neutral, and 5 qualities that you don't particularly like about yourself. And so it's about acknowledging that we all have things that we don't like. We all have weaknesses. We all mess up. We all do those things because we're human beings. And can we take a look at that without going into that self-critical, you're piece of crap, or oh no, it wasn't my fault, it was your fault. If we can take that and look at it like face value in a compassionate way, I think we can then grow. Otherwise, we kind of get just stuck in the way we are.
Yeah, that makes sense. But I think maybe it's because of just Asian parents in general, or just parents, especially about comparing like us to their kids or something around those lines. I feel like a lot of kids mostly focus on the negative aspects of themselves, maybe the way we were brought up, but I don't, do you have any advice of like trying to find good things about yourself?
Yeah.
I mean, I have something to add on to that question. I think, I don't want to Sydney, I feel like many times you want to be fine with yourself and you personally are like, okay, I gave myself constructive feedback, I'll fix it next time. But then at the same time, you're getting pressure from everyone around you that was not okay. And you shouldn't have done that. And you are so awful for doing that. But even though you want to bring peace, and that just adds on to your mindset and drives you a completely other direction back to the severe criticism you're trying to get away from.
Yeah. And I think what you guys are kind of talking about is that some of the sources of self-esteem are environmental, right? You mentioned societal pressures, one of like what society tells us we should and shouldn't be like, but some of it comes from our own parents, our own family, and be the way they kind of shape us. We start trying to think about that ourselves. We just take on what they're telling us, right? Because that's just the nature of humans. They're teaching you their ways, and their ways sometimes, unfortunately, can be to compare and to say that this is better than this, and you need to act in this way. So for that reason, I think compassion is like so important, because it's essentially saying, again, that it doesn't matter if you got an A or D or anything, really. It doesn't matter if you made a mistake or failed an exam, you're still worthy of love. You're still a good person. You don't, it's about kind of staying grounded in the fact that there's nothing wrong with you, even though it might feel like everyone is telling you that there is. And that's hard. It's hard to kind of cope with that. How do you feel like you guys would kind of manage balancing those things?
Honestly, I feel like I'm not doing a good job with my mental health at all, though I wish I could say that I am. That's sadly not the truth. But I was kind of wondering, like, how is there any cases where comparison is actually a good thing?
That's a good question. I'm trying to find a way of, I mean,
I feel like I can answer some of this, and then maybe it'll drive your thought process too. But I feel like sometimes comparison can be there to help you see like a level, because although it's bad to think that, oh, I need to be like this person, oh, or I need to like be better, but sometimes you need to know that, oh, this is where I'm at, and this is what I should strive to be. So it's like, maybe it'll help to set your goals, but I feel like I also kind of wanted to ask you, how do you find a balance? Because sometimes you need to find your goals. Many times you're driven to like get to where you want to reach, but someone else will help drive that. But how do you make sure you're doing that, but also you're not like breaking down at yourself and finding compassion?
So it's your question, how do you kind of pursue those goals while still kind of remaining compassionate to yourself?
Yeah, but it's like, because of comparison sometimes being good in the sense of helping you like find a state that you should be at, like finding where you're at, but also sometimes comparisons and most of the time bad because it like drives you to break down at yourself. But just the balance.
Yeah, and I think the balance is because if you compare yourself in order to kind of gauge your self-worth, I don't see that in being helpful at all, because if you could look at the person in that, homeless person, be like, well, I'm better than them, and how is that helpful, right? Like, I think that kind of drives that egotistical behavior that we were talking about. But I think if you're gonna compare yourself to other people, compare yourself in the sense that like other people are struggling too. Other people have mental health stuff that they're dealing with. Everybody struggles. Everybody makes mistakes. If you can compare yourself to the flaws and to the inadequacies of people, and in a way to ground yourself that those are normal, I think that could be beneficial. What are your thoughts about that? Does that kind of make sense?
No, that completely makes sense. But yeah, okay. So usually with comparison, as we already talked about like before, social media is a huge factor. And like, how do we know whether everything they're posting is real or not real? Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. It's like, and you don't, and it's probably not, because even if it is real, I mean, it's not like, people are fabricating everything, but it's not a real representation of their life. I mean, if you look at your Instagram or your social media and you took it outside of like knowing what you know about yourself, do you think that it really accurately reflects who you are as a person?
I don't think
Probably
so.
not.
Mine either. Right? It looks like my life is great because we just put the highlights.
Yeah, it's honestly just like, you know how on Instagram you have the highlight reel bar right here? To be honest, I think the whole app itself is a highlight reel, not just that part of it.
Yeah.
And it's just many times it's hard to determine, like, whenever you're down on yourself and you're demoralizing yourself, not demoralizing because also that's a very harsh term, but also just when you're negating yourself and you go on social media and you see everyone else's highlight reel, I think it's just like, oh, well, that's them. And your mind is like, I'm not an expert, so I won't really say anything. But your mind kind of thinks that, oh, well, that's their life. That's what I'm gonna see about them.
Mhm.
And many times you don't really go and look at your highlight reel, and you're not just like, oh, well, that's my highlight reel, and I can see that that's probably their highlight reel too. You kind of just keep going down on yourself.
Take it at
I don't
face
know if that
value.
makes sense.
No, yeah, that makes sense. You forget that this is just like the tip of the iceberg and there's all kinds of other stuff under the water. You just kind of get sucked into it. And that's what, social media is designed to do, is to lure you in and kind of, make you feel like you're not good enough so that you can, try to strive to be good enough with these ways that these products that they like market you along the way. So yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying.
Sorry for the background noise, but my fish tank actually just turned on. But do you have any final comments before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I think just kind of to reiterate that it might feel like self-esteem is the way to go. And it is nice to feel good about yourself. I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all. But I think what's going to really carry you during the good times and the bad is that self-compassion, about being a friend to yourself. And if you can create that practice now and continue to build on it, because what I've noticed in my work with people is that this doesn't come naturally to most people. You have to put in work to get there, because most of us are just going about life being self-critical or comparison and doing, that's just the way we've been taught to behave. So if it's one thing I would say is just remember that everybody else is struggling just as much as you are, and you're allowed to make mistakes. You're allowed to feel badly sometimes. All of that stuff is normal part of the human experience.
Well, in that case, I will add getting self-compassion to my homework list because it's like another thing I have to do.
Yeah.
Well, yes, this conversation was super insightful and very helpful, and I definitely will utilize, I think I speak behind Sydney and all the listeners' behalf, that I will definitely utilize things that you taught us today in my life and just in whenever I'm like feel a bit down. And so thank you so much for your time. We've loved having you here, and thank you everyone for listening. Make sure to join us every month for a conversation, for more discussion about mental health issues and how to cope with them. And for more information about Miss Sanchez, visit her website at www.anxiety-therapist.com. And if you want any more information about the self-compassion that Miss Sanchez talked about earlier in this podcast, please check the description below. And we will see you next month.
All right. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay.